this, the hell with it. It's solid. We're going to run it later.
I'll lower this. You tell me when.
That's perfect right there. That's perfect. So, quickest, easiest way to apply this. What I'm going to do, and this is we're talking about a finish, an application. And I really should wait the application to do this. Somebody asked the question, how do I get a professional look with a wipe-on finish with no guns, rollers, or brushes? I'm going to do that for you right in front of your eyes. And here's what you do. Normally I wear an apron, and my apron has about a dozen can openers. I'm not kidding.
That's why we keep so many around the shop.
No,
Can't
I
ever
just
find
keep
them.
them in my apron. They always live in the same spot. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to shake up my finish a little bit so that I don't have to stir it because I'm lazy. Otherwise, you have to stir it. Now, normally you don't work out of a can. You pour it into another container and work that way. But I'm going to cheat today because this is the magic of television. Here's what you do. You take a piece of Scotch-Brite, either gray or white, and you're going to dip it into the finish. No thinning, no alteration, and you're going to scrub it on just like this. Right? And then once I've scrubbed it on, I'm going to wipe it off. And I'm going to wipe it all off aggressively because no matter how well I wipe it off, I will not get it back off that wood. Okay, now this will not pick up dust. There's no sags or runs. There's no brush marks. There's no spray marks. It's beautiful and even. I'm going to do that, just what I did here, once a day. Then tomorrow I'll come back and put another coat on the same way, scrub it on and wipe it all off. And then the next day, another coat. So I'm going to spend, I don't know, a couple of minutes a day at the most, and I'll put on as many coats as I want until I like the way it looks. And that is the simplest way. You get a perfectly smooth finish, no brush marks, no spray marks, no drip, sags, or runs, and no dust in the finish. Okay, is that simple enough? Application. And this is a oil-based polyurethane, so it's surprisingly durable. Now, years down the road, if it starts looking shabby, all you have to do is come back, lightly scuff it with 400 grit paper or even Scotch-Brite, coarser Scotch-Brite, and then just put another coat or two on, and you're good to go again. It's a real quick, simple way of applying a finish. Don't thin it. Use it right out of the can. The Scotch-Brite will allow you to scrub it, even if it's fairly thick. It won't get slimy the way a rag gets slimy. And wipe it all off. It's going to feel like, well, I'm taking it all off. I didn't accomplish anything. Trust me, you're building up a thin layer each time, and the very best finishes are the ones where each layer is as thin as possible. So that's the quick and easy way to get a very durable, very attractive finish with no skill and no tools.
I like that.
You like that?
I like that.
A lot of stuff. That's what's on this table, by the way.
Yeah.
Just what you saw.
Yeah.
I scrubbed it on, wiped it off, and then I wax it so that nothing sticks to it.
Right.
So when I want to do it again, I just de-wax it. I take the wax off and just rough it up a little, put another coat on.
I like that.
Or two or three. It stretches the whole process out over a little bit,
Yeah.
over several days, but there's so little time and effort for each day that you do it. It goes so fast.
You
It's
want
so
it higher?
easy. No, that's fine. Perfect right there. Now, when you wipe off, I like to lay my rags out. In the case of a polyurethane, it's not that big a deal. You're not going to get spontaneous combustion, but it's a good habit to get into. So if you have an oily rag, you lay it out one layer thick, and in a day or so, it'll dry until it's hard and crusty. As soon as it's hard and crusty, it's landfill safe. You can put it out with the trash. Which finishes are hardest? That is most durable. Number one, hardness and durability are not the same thing. I'll give you an example. If I were to take a piece of glass and a razor blade and tried to cut the glass, I wouldn't be able to cut it. That's hard. But if I took a hammer and hit the glass, it would shatter right away. On the other hand, if I took a piece of rubber, I could easily cut that with the razor blade, but if I hit it with a hammer, nothing happened. So which is more durable? Well, durability has to do with what it is you want it to endure. That's very important. For example, you can have something that's extremely hard, but not necessarily durable to something you subject it to. A good example of that is ice, okay? If you remember the Titanic, you'll realize that that iceberg was hard. It was damn hard. But put some heat on ice and it turns into water. So what is it that you want the finish to endure? Does it have to be heat resistant, stain resistant, chemical resistant, scratch resistant? How much does it have to move and how flexible does it have to be? All of those things have to do with durability. So in order to answer that question, you first have to say, what do I want to subject it to? And which finishes will tolerate those specific assaults? Okay. All right, so let me give you some examples. Both shellac and lacquer are very hard. They're brittle finishes. They're very durable. They're very waterproof. They're very stain resistant. They're only somewhat chemical resistant. They resist some chemicals, but not others. And neither one of them is particularly heat resistant. If you had a shellac finish on a tabletop and you set a nice hot pot of coffee on it, it's going to melt it. Why? Because shellac and lacquer are amorphous solids. They have what's called a T sub G, a glass transition temperature. That means at a certain temperature, they stop acting like solids and start acting like liquids, just like glass does. That's why it's called a glass transition temperature. The glass transition temperature for shellac is very low. It's somewhere between 160 and 180 degrees Fahrenheit. So a 212 degree hot pot of coffee could easily melt that. So you follow what I'm saying? You really have to decide what it is you want to protect against. Some finishes have better scratch resistance, some have better heat, some chemical, some stain resistant. One of the most popular finishes that you yourself can use, not a high-tech finish, one that doesn't require any equipment to apply other than your hands, is oil-based polyurethane. Oil-based polyurethane has excellent heat resistance, very good stain resistance, very good chemical resistance, excellent chemical resistance, and very good scratch resistance. And those are usually the four things that we're most worried about. So that's a really good one if you want to use that. There are high-tech finishes that also have all of those properties, and sometimes even more properties that they will impart. But I don't really want to get into high-tech finishes tonight. We can avoid it. So what do I use on this? This is my work table. If you want to know what it's finished with, it is finished. It's finished with oil-based polyurethane. And I'm going to show you in a minute how I apply it. And every now and then, if it needs to be rejuvenated, you just sand it and put on another coat, and you're good to go. And by sand, I mean just lightly scuff sand. So just rough it up a bit and then put on another coat. Not necessarily, but it's probably a good idea. You need to finish both sides of a piece of solid wood if both sides are exposed to the air. There are exceptions, but as a general rule, it's a good idea to, in the same way that when you lay up plywood, you lay it up evenly, you should do the same thing with finishes. But does it have to be the same finish? No. Here's what you need to worry about. One of the characteristics of a finish, and remember, All finishes allow moisture vapor to go through them, all finishes. But some slow it down more than others. So the game here is whatever you put on the top side, however well that slows down moisture vapor transmission, you want the same ability on the bottom side. There are a lot of finishes that fill that category, so they do not have to be exactly the same. Okay? And again, we're not talking about water. Pretty much all film finishes shed water beautifully. We're talking about moisture vapor. And no matter what the finish is, moisture vapor will get through it. They did some tests many, many years ago to check all the different finishes at different thicknesses to see how much they impeded moisture vapor transmission. Anyone want to guess which one was absolutely the best at holding out moisture vapor? Anyone want to guess? You want to guess?
Polyurethane?
No,
Okay.
gold leaf.
Cold leaf.
Gold leaf, because what gold leaf is a thin layer of metal.
Right.
And that did a better job than any finish. Finishes or plastics. I mean, we think of them as solids that nothing can get through, but in fact, there's big, big spaces in between the molecules.
Right.
And small molecules can get right through them. And frankly, water vapor is a very small molecule. So it goes through finishes and into the wood and makes the wood move. So there you go. Now, let me show you one other thing. Let me see if I have a board out here to demo on. I'm going to show you the quickest, easiest way to apply an oil-based finish which solvents are safe to use? Okay, let me change that question. Which chisels are safe to use? The answer is any that you don't stick into your hand. Which solvents are safe to use? It's like a table saw or any other tool that cuts or can harm you. The ones you know how to handle. If you know how to handle that chemical, you can handle it safely. If you don't, then chances are you can't. Now, are there solvents that are more benign than others? Yes, absolutely. Of course there are. But you don't really have much choice in the matter, do you? That's going to move me on to the next question, and I'll tie these two together. How do you choose which solvents to use? It's very simple. Everything that you want to solvate or dissolve has a solvent that's best at dissolving it. For example, if I want to dissolve sugar or salt, what would I use for the solvent?
Water.
Water, of course. What would happen if I used lacquer thinner? Wouldn't dissolve it. It would just sit at the bottom. On the other hand, if I want to dissolve cellulose nitrate resin, which is the resin in nitrocellulose lacquer, and I put that in water, it won't do a damn thing. It'll just sit there. And it's white, by the way, in its solid form. So for that, I need lacquer thinner. So each material, when we chart these things, and I mean, I worked as a formulator. When you work as a formulator, you get these solvency charts. They're triangular. They're not an XY axis. There are three axes. And what you get is this area, this spot of where the resin will be dissolved. And then you overlay all the different solvents, and they each have a puddle of what area they dissolve. And you'll see right away which solvents will dissolve which resins. Even if the finish is already formulated into a liquid, the same thing goes. If you put the wrong solvent into something, so let's say I dumped some water into this, it would not mix. It would completely separate out. And it's the same way the other way around. If I dumped oil into a finish that didn't tolerate oil, it wouldn't mix and it wouldn't dissolve the resin. So you must use whatever solvent is the right one for whatever you're using. How do you know what that is? They're going to tell you right on the label. If it's a solid that you're trying to figure out, you can look it up and find out what will dissolve what, or you can write to me and I'll tell you. So that's how you choose which solvents to use. I mean, I can tell you which solvents are more benign, but does it really matter? I mean, if you're trying to dissolve or thin lacquer, you can't do it with the most benign solvents because they won't work. So you have to use the solvent that's appropriate for the material. You can't just choose and say, I want to use the safest solvent. That doesn't mean it's going to work.